Hi, before I get started, my slides is linked with my video, so if you want to pull that up, it'd probably be best to follow along that way. For my poetry presentation, I chose Mending Wall by Robert Frost. He was born March 26, 1874, and died January 29, 1963. He lived in San Francisco until he was about 11, and that was around when his father passed away, and then he moved to Massachusetts. He moved to England in 1912 and made friends with fellow poets who had quite a significant influence on his writing and keeping him writing. They were some of the first people to encourage him and just keep him writing, along with his wife. He had to move back to the States in 1914 because of the start of World War I, and that was around the time when he published this, which was also in 1914. Since it was written during the start of World War I, a lot of the hostility was high, and this caused boundaries between people and was probably a large influence on why he wrote this poem. It was to show that people stick to what they know and stick to the people that they know and what they have taught them. It was also written in the hopes of showing why boundaries, while they're sometimes important, do cause issues and tension. This is similar to how today media causes a lot of tension and causes people to put up boundaries and barriers between people that are not quite like them. So, like different ethnic groups, religious groups, and people of different sexual orientations. Now I'm going to read the poem, and then I am going to go over my analysis. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it, and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair, where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding, to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean, no one has seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each, and some are loaves, and some so nearly balls. We have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are until our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game. On a side, it comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine and I'm apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines, I tell him. He only says, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he say it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. Throughout the poem, the narrator is not quite on the same page as the neighbor. He doesn't understand what they're keeping up this wall for and what the importance of it is, but the neighbor sees it as a tradition that was passed down by his father, and he continues to keep it up. This can be translated, if you look into it more deeply, people are taught to do the things that they do, and he is taught to keep up boundaries. So now in this, it's physical, but it could be mental as well. Like they could block people out or take it a different way. The narrator says the line, there where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine and I am apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the cones under his pines. When he says that, he's saying there is no reasonable reason to keep this wall where it is. But that could also be taken as like there's no reason to put up certain boundaries that people do. And the neighbor only responds with good fences make good neighbors. He could be portraying that if you have certain boundaries, it can make better friendships because you know where the line is drawn and you know where to separate yourself. So that is the good part of the boundaries that are set up within this poem. But while these could also be the good things, he refuses to change his tradition. And he continues saying the same phrase, good fences make good neighbors, continuously throughout the poem. And this is a show of just how strong people hold on to traditions that are passed down to them, and how people continue to do the same thing and refuse to reflect on what they have done. They both refuse. The neighbor mostly refuses to change how he refuses to change how he thinks, and the narrator, while still going along with it, also doesn't necessarily take in the neighbor's account of how he feels. And that is the contradiction between their views and how that affects them. This poem also takes into account that traditions do bring people together, which for these two men, it brings them together every spring to continue doing the thing that they've done for what seems like a long time. It's almost a direct contrast to the physical barrier, because they are mentally coming together to do this instead of physically being separated by this wall. And it can be the reason for why their relationship is as strong as it is. Not that it's super strong, but for the strength of their relationship, it is important, and it can separate or bring them together both mentally and physically. While reading through the poem, you can tell that it's written in blank verse, which is similar to free verse, but it has a rhythm still. It doesn't rhyme, but it keeps the rhythm. Through each of the lines throughout the poem have 10 syllables in them, and they follow an iambic metameter. And because of this, it is easier to follow along and get interested in, because it still has that rhythm, and it's structured instead of bouncing around with different things and making it sound different in your head. The themes in this poem that are explored are boundaries and borders, contradictions and point of views, and traditions. The poem goes not only over the fact that the two men are putting up a physical boundary between them, but boundaries that can be mental that are put up between just anybody. The two men have conflicting point of views about this boundary, and that can be like the same if, just like anybody with a friendship, if you have a certain boundary, you can have conflicting point of views about it. But despite their conflicting point of view, they continue to do the same thing that they have done and continue to repeat a tradition and not change anything about it, which is shown with the good fences make good neighbors, and him continuously saying that instead of taking into consideration what his friend or his neighbor is saying, what the narrator is saying. The message that Frost is trying to convey can be taken politically, because it was written during the war and based on the tensions being high and how people would separate themselves from others because of fear. The speaker is showing different things, including like that boundaries can be good and bad, as well as traditions and conflicts in point of views. He wanted to bring attention to these different things so that people would think more about what they were doing and how these boundaries affected them and their relationships, and maybe instigate change if they figured that what they were doing was wrong. 5 poetic devices that are used are blank verse, enjambment, metaphors, repetition, and symbolism. His poems lack rhyme, but they follow a rhythm, which we previously talked about, and that makes them blank verse. A specific line that shows this is when he wrote, "Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it, and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps even two can pass abreast." All of the lines could show this, but I think that the first 4 lines are the best because it sets up the blank verse for the rest of the poem. And blank verse allows the writer to have more freedom when they are telling the story, and also like to run together more smoothly. Multiple lines also carry on to the next line without any punctuation, which is called enjambment. An example of this one is, before I built a wall, I'd asked to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. The 32nd and 33rd lines are separated, but there is no punctuation to like separate them completely, and it gives it more flow rather than it being choppy. The next one used is metaphors, which is to use completely unrelated things to show the complexity of the situation. He does this when he refers to them as pine and apple orchard. They are not literally these things, but he is trying to do it. She's trying to say this to his neighbor that would make more sense for the two men, and to give him another way to look at it. Like, maybe if he doesn't understand that what this wall is doing for them, and what he won't cross over that line, maybe if he describes them as trees and what these trees may do, it will make more sense to his neighbor. Repetition is also used by the neighbor when he continuously says good fences make good neighbors throughout the poem. It brings the reader back and makes them take a closer look at what it may mean and why it is necessary to the telling of the poem. Symbolism is also very important for this poem and many poems, because it allows the reader to imagine deeper meaning within the story. The wall is what symbolizes the boundaries within the story, which is the main idea. And a way to do this is, and set the wall between us once again, we keep the wall between us as we go. So there's a separation between them. While they do have a physical one, there's also a mental separation between the two of them, and just between people in general. The tone of Frost's poem is quite hostile and ambiguous. It allows the reader to take it their own way, but there's quite a bit of hostility from the neighbor and probably people during the time that he wrote this. He doesn't feel that breaking the tradition it has any reason, because he's continuously done this for his whole life. And when the narrator brings it up, he's quite hostile about it and kind of just shuts him down with the good fences make good neighbors. The narrator does feel differently about this, and there's a lot less hostility from him. But all of this you can take your own way. Like, you can take it completely different ways. Maybe the neighbor had some sort of trauma that makes him do this, all that jazz. It's very ambiguous and allows the reader to take it as they will. Symbolism is very important to do all of this, because it can show you a certain thing like the wall and have it mean a completely different reason, which is why the ambiguity of it is important. In the line, spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion on his head, why do they make good neighbors? The narrator is asking himself a question that can be taken as a double meaning. It lets the reader dwell on what he may have truly meant by it. In this poem, the narrator is not the poet. It is a fictional farmer that he made up. It is easier to get his point across this way because he can use the wall as his fictional barrier, and it's just an easier way to show the physical boundary and let the reader think about the mental ones. Instead of being him who's a writer, it can be a farmer with his neighbor who's putting up a wall. Everybody at some point faces a boundary and or puts one up themselves. It is something that we all go through, and it's important for our relationships and how we live everyday life. Tradition is also very relatable, and it's hard to break. It might not be something like mending a wall, but something for me is like I eat KFC on Christmas Eve every year. Like, you don't want to break these traditions, you keep them up. And the neighbor in this poem is the one that keeps up the tradition and makes sure they keeps on doing it. Everyone experiences these things and has a negative and positive outlook on them, just like Frost, and that's why he wrote this. I personally chose this poem, though, because I am on the Quiz Bowl team, and I specialize in literature section. which means I memorize the frequently brought up literature questions and who wrote it, and also like plots of certain stories. I enjoy Frost's poem, The Road Not Taken, and I thought it would be fun to do an analysis on the poem of his that I have not read yet. The 3 questions I'm going to ask you guys is, number 1, if I had not read my analysis of this poem, what would have been your initial thoughts on the meaning? Number 2, do you think the story would have been more effective if it were more direct to the hidden meaning instead of it being a physical barrier? What if it was more of a mental barrier? And number 3, what is the purpose of the boundary in this poem versus a majority of boundaries? Thank you.